Assalamu alaikum, friends of BookBytes. We're just about to get going with season 12 of BookBytes just after Ramadan, and we're really excited about what's on offer. 5 years into programming, we have predicated curating these programs and this particular book review show on really enhancing and celebrating South African and local literature and giving our audiences and readership a sense that there's really some incredible literature out there, locally written, trying very much to encourage more of the same. We're meant to write our stories. So today's guest, we're starting off strong this season with Professor Siphiwo Mahala, who's a South African writer, editor, and academic. He's a graduate of the University of Fort Hare, holds a master's degree in African literature from Wits University and a PhD in English literature from the University of South Africa. His research interests include contemporary African literature, colonial and post-colonial literature, Black intellectual history, short story writing, and creative writing. He's the author of the novel When a Man Cries from 2007, which he later translated into isiXhosa as Yakalindoda 2010. His short story collections include African Delights, Red Apple Dreams, and Other Stories. And today's program will focus on his latest publication from last month, which is The Missing Pages. As a playwright, he wrote two critically acclaimed plays, The House of Truth in 2016 and Bloke and His American Bantu in 2021, which is now put together as a playwright collection, also recently launched. His monograph, Can Themba, The Making and Breaking of the Intellectual Tsotsi from 2022, won the Creative Nonfiction Award at the South African Literary Awards and the 2024 Book of the Year at the Vice Chancellor's Distinguished Awards. He serves as the Deputy Chairperson of the National Arts Festival Board, and he's full professor in the English department at the University of Johannesburg and also editor of Imbiza Journal for African Writing. Professor Mahala, welcome to today's show of BookBytes. It's such an incredible honor to have you here today, and we look forward to getting into the mind of Siphiwo Mahala and what's brought you to this point. Welcome to BookBytes.
Thank you. Good evening to you too, Shafinaaz. Thanks for having me here. It's such a pleasure to finally make it to BookBytes, and it sounds so strange when you call me professor.
Well, we're so proud of you because you've accomplished so much, especially, I think, elevated in the last few years. So it's a real celebration from the point of view of BookBytes, from myself as a local author. But, just to be able to view and be so motivated and inspired by your work, we obviously wish you a lot more where that comes from. Let's take it back to where this all began for you. Where did it begin?
Okay.
Where did it begin? And what inspires and motivates you to keep pushing this mechanism of writing in the machine, like in the machinery that you do?
Well, I made friends with books from an early age. My interest was in images. I think even before I could write, I used to draw a lot. So my interest in books really was the images. So I think as soon as I learned how to write, I started interpreting those images. So if I see an image in a text in a book, I would want to understand what it's all about. So I usually say when people ask me when I started writing, I usually point to 2001 when I first published my first two short stories. But my friend, childhood friend, pointed me back to the 80s when I was in primary school, when I used to write sketches, picture stories, so to speak. You know, there was Bona magazine, which always had what we called the Bafanas, the comics in the end, or stories, picture stories. So I started writing the picture stories from primary school. And by high school, I was very clear that I wanted to study literature. As a result, at university, I studied literature. I had a combination of courses that did not make sense. I had English literature and I had Xhosa literature. So by the time I finished my degree, I didn't know what to do. So the only alternative was to just continue studying until I become an academic. But obviously, I left academia after getting my master's in 2002. I went to work because I had brought a child to this world. And yeah, in the process of working, I continued writing. I think while I was a public servant, I wrote about 5 books and also got my PhD while working full time.
That's fantastic because I mean I think when one looks at your the life and the process from which you started, it's important for us to be able to celebrate that there's often a dream and humble beginnings to bring you to where you are. And I think there's a lot of aspiring writers out there who might wonder and say, well, we won't be, you know, like that groot man there. But to know the process is very, very important. Speak to us about some of the earlier writings before we get into the missing pages, because I feel like this is coming full circle for you. Speak to us about the beginning writings, short format, and what the power of story means to you in your writing.
Yeah, well, actually, my writing is linked to my reading, really, because I'm an admirer of short story writing. I grew up reading the likes of Pitim Tuze, a Xhosa writer who's brilliant in short stories. I got introduced to the works of Mulelo Mzamane, who was my vice chancellor and later my mentor, who himself was a student of Ken Themba. So essentially, that's a person who really indoctrinated me in as far as Ken Themba is concerned. I grew up reading the works of Njabulo Ndebele. So when I got to Wits in 2002, I was part of the first cohort to start creative writing. I had a course, a module in creative writing, and I presented a story that I had published a year before. That story was called Bumi's Assignment. And then when I presented this story, the reaction was that it reminded them of Ken Themba's The Suit. So I went back to Ken Themba to try and understand the connection, because I thought the implication was that I had plagiarized The Suit. But it turned out later on that, you know, there are certain resonances that were not necessarily plagiarism, but also in the process, I identified a gap in the suit. And, you know, if you remember, Ken Themba's The Suit is about this man who gets caught and jumps out the window, leaving the suit behind. And then the suit is used as an instrument to punish the cheating woman. So I was left with a question as to what happened to the man that jumped out the window. So I began to reimagine his story. And I think from that point, there was no going back for me. The suit continued, was published in 2002, and then yeah, I found myself going back to short story writing for that reason.
I said this before, you are the master of short story writing in our country. There's no doubt about that. I know you're going to be humble about it. But also in terms of how short story has been reignited in South Africa, and how your work has played out in encouraging and maybe even entrenching this notion. Because there's a power in our story, in the local story. You took the Ken Themba story, you reimagined and expanded on it. I think Zukezwa Wana did as well. I mean, there's this ongoing conversation with the story of the suit and the work of Ken Themba, which we'll even get to later. I definitely want to get more into that perspective of your relationship with the writer who was and the work that continues to be in the genre and in the canon of Ken Themba. Let's also talk about the short story in a broader sense, and how you might want to encourage through your own writing and through your teachings the telling of the local story.
Yeah, I know. As I said, I grew up reading short stories. It's a genre that I'm really passionate about, and so much that my first novel, When a Man Cries, which was published in 2007. When I was writing that novel, I started it as short stories, but at that time, there was not so much interest in short story writing. So I had to rewrite those short stories, because what I realized is that when I looked at the short story that I had at the time, is that they were interconnected thematically because they were all grappling with the questions of manhood and masculinity. So what I did was just to try and link them up and now write them as chapters as opposed to individual short stories, whereby the characters continued from one chapter to another. And yeah, fortunately, it was published in 2007. And then after I published my first novel, now there was interest in my writing. Publishers started approaching me, asking me if I have any other work coming up. So that's when I thought, okay, this is opportune for me to publish short stories. And at that time, most publishers had disclaimers on their website that we don't publish short stories, and I gave it a shot. I approached Chakana, who were one of the most vibrant and successful publishers at the time, and who also were one of the publishers that declared that they did not want short stories. And yeah, they could not refuse it. And of course, it included the suit, continued, as well as Zuke Savanner's The Dress That Fed the Suit. So that's how my first collection made it to print in 2011. And basically from that point, there was a new wave. Hence, I call the decade between 2011 and 2021 as the short story decade, because that's where many authors began exploring, and publishers became more receptive to short stories. The likes of Nick Mhlongo kept publishing short stories during that period. Sifiso Mzobe and many other writers started publishing short story collections.
I agree. I think there was a time when the short story was seen as a bit disconnected or disjointed, maybe. Stories were seen as disjointed. And being able to chain them together gave some impetus, or even to put them into certain kinds of themes. I do really see a great deal of appreciation for short story now among readers. Maybe it's just that we're more compulsive in our reading and we want a quick short story and to be able to round it up. But there's definitely been a resurgence of the short story. Let's talk about the missing pages. I've seen some comments on your Facebook pages about readers wanting to see what the missing pages is about. Talk to us about how you got here. What is the theme and the reasoning behind the missing pages?
I mean, this baby.
Congratulations.
The missing pages really is me again, celebrating short story writing. The title story, The Missing Pages, was, okay, maybe I shouldn't say inspired, but I was challenged by Sabata Mpomugai, who approached me and said, could you write something in relation to Saul Plaatje's Mafeking diaries? As you know, the Saul Plaatje wrote the first diary by a Black person, written from a Black perspective about what was then known as the Anglo-Boer War, and it was discovered much later and only got published in 1972. So, Sabata challenged me to have some kind of intergenerational dialogue in more or less the same fashion I did with Ken Themba. And I took that as a challenge. He challenged me to read the text and immerse myself in that period. And upon reading the text, I realized that the first 7 days of the war were missing in Saul Plaatje's account. So I had to reimagine now how those first 7 days got omitted from his account. And yeah, so that gave the title story. And of course, when I was invited to India, to the Dibrugarh University International Literary Festival, and they asked me if I had anything in store. I said, well, I have short stories, that I'd love you to consider. And they looked at them, they loved them, and they published them. So this collection is published in India. Of course, it includes The Missing Pages is one of 10 stories in this collection. There are some stories that really excite me, but maybe you should tell me which ones you'd like us to talk about specifically out of the 10.
I think give us two that will give a taste of the sort of, the scope of the stories within them. Give us a sense of two. And if you'd like to read something from there, that would be great.
Okay. Well, the stories really take us from the 1800s through to the 1950s, 1980s, and the present moment. So as a literary historian, I like reflecting, as I did, for instance, with the Solbraji story. But there are some very personal stories that I've included here. One of them, for instance, is the asylum. The asylum is a story that has stayed with me for a very long time, in the sense that I'm reflecting on my own upbringing, perhaps grappling with some of my childhood traumas. And one of those has to do with the visit to an asylum where my mother was a patient when I was a child. She had a mental illness, and we grew up as a family that cherished the time of Christmas, for instance, and the mother would make it special. So now this Christmas, my mother was in an asylum, and my family had to deal with those dilemmas. And yeah, I'm reflecting on that childhood experience, and of course, it's fictionalized this time around. So that's one story that's really, really close to my heart. Another story that's close to my heart is Bonzi's Toe, which is a republication. It was featured in my previous short story collection. Bonzi's Toe, again, has to do with the 80s. Some of the, as children playing soccer in the streets, and some of the adult rules that, as children were forced to grow up very quickly and get exposed to the happenings in the 80s, in the townships, the soldiers and all. And one other story is also, again, a new story called The Indian Ancestor. It's a story about South Africa's cultural diversity. It's a story about someone who is haunted by an Indian ancestor, and this is a Black person like me who believes that they might have an Indian ancestor, and they need to go through certain rituals, and they are not even sure where to begin. But the stories are more complex than I'm telling them now. I think I'm better at writing them than at talking about them.
Now, while you're speaking, I'm just thinking about the connectivity and the links, and also the important nature of writing identity into our stories, writing race, recollecting the past in a way that's now sort of relatable for a new readership. And what I'm thinking is the book was published in India, which is great, but is there potential and impetus for it to be published locally? Because these are our stories.
Actually, you're the third person to ask me that question. After the second person raised it, I really thought about it. And yeah, I will have to consider. The book will be launched this week on Thursday. So that's where I will gauge the interest and perhaps the approach to selling the collection in South Africa. Of course, there are a number of publishers that I work with and that have previously expressed interest in publishing my work. So yeah, it's something to consider.
Well, we definitely look forward to seeing more copies available because there's incredible worth and value in the work that you put out there, and it deserves a wide readership, as with your previous works. I want to step back again and say, you wrote from the perspective of the suit. You filled in those missing pages, so to speak, as well. You're constantly looking at adding to narrative, and I think that's been a part of the larger scope of your work. But you also wrote the biography of Ken Themba. And in many ways, you're sort of like the spiritual son of the Themba legacy, because something beautiful happened at Time of the Writer last month, and I want to bring that in. There are often these competitions where young readership and young writers are encouraged. And I'm really, really so impressed by this collaboration that has been announced at Time of the Writer last month, together with the Dramatic Artistic and Literary Rights Organization and the Center for Creative Arts at UKZN, where Dr. Mohammed announced the Ken Themba Merit Award. What I really love is, of course, we've had these situations, and we continue to have, where young writers put their story into the hat, so to speak, and you choose about 10 or 20 writers, and then they're published, and it's very exciting to see work being published out there. But this time, there's just so much on offer. Before I get into the sort of nitty-gritties of the Ken Themba Award, talk to us about the legacy and what you see happening through this program, but also in terms of your own work. You remain the sort of most foremost researcher of Ken Themba's work and legacy. Talk to us a little bit about the man and the legacy that was and is Ken Themba.
Yeah, thank you. I must say again, my interest in Ken Themba really began with the exploration of the suit. After I wrote The Suit Continued in 2002, so many scholars wrote comparing my work to Ken Themba's. And the assumption was that I knew who Ken Themba was, and in reality, I didn't. And unfortunately, when I tried to research, there was no definitive study on Ken Themba. But fortunately, on the other hand, at the time, I had interactions with the likes of Eskia Mphahlele, Louis Ngosi, and Kirapes Khosisile, all of whom had interactions with Ken Themba, and they loved talking about Ken Themba. So my interest in Ken Themba began at that time. I started recording these anecdotes and then began to interrogate the archives, and that resulted in me registering for a PhD and finally writing my thesis on Ken Themba and later on the book. And what I really learned about Ken Themba, among other things, is that he was a great teacher. We celebrated him as a journalist for Drum magazine. We celebrated him as a short story writer. In fact, there's a connection between his journalism and his short story writing, in the sense that Ken Themba, by qualification, was a teacher. He had studied at Forte, the same university I studied in. And he came into the limelight when he won the very first Drum Short Story Prize. And after winning that prize, he was recruited into Drum and worked for them, and became more well known now as a journalist. And while working for Drum, he mentored many young people. And as we know today, that his short story, The Suit, is probably the most adapted short story in South Africa. It was adapted as a play. It was later made into a short film. It's a dance piece. It's a musical. It's also, it's been adapted to different genres. But what is significant is that for Ken Themba to have this exposure to be established in these different fields, it took a single short story. And that short story was adapted, and that opened way for his work to be accessible to audiences beyond literature. So I thought it prudent that in celebrating Ken Themba, it's not enough to talk about his name. It would be great to have a library named after him. It would be great to have a strip named after him someday. But above all, I thought it's prudent that to celebrate a writer, let us look at his trajectory and celebrate him, in more or less the same way he established himself, through short story writing and through adaptation. And that's what the DALRO short story, so the DALRO Merit, Ken Themba Merit Award does. It ensures cross-pollination between short stories and dramatic arts, that is theater.
I think it's fascinating because, like I've said, and I've got the full list that I want to look at. Like I've said, the important thing is that it's one thing having young talent, being able to find young talent and putting it into the form of an anthology, and very exciting for emerging writers to be seen in print. But I think that the levels at which this award has been put together, the thoughtfulness with which you and the team have sat down and put this together is just incredible. So I want to go through it because I ensured, instead of just doing the research, I got Dr. Mohammed from the Center for Creative Arts to send me like the full list. The top 10 will be fully funded to participate in the 2026 Time of the Writer Festival, and they'll be published in anthology by Wits University Press. The top 10 also receive mentoring in specialized workshops on publishing, copyrights, and marketing. So DALRO is very adept at all of that. Top 3 will be invited to participate in the book launch in September in Johannesburg. The top 2 will be supported to participate in a book event in the Western Cape. The top writer gets 10,000 Rand in cash and a full participation, fully paid participation in the Bergen Literary Festival in Norway. And the top writer is allocated a dramaturge to assist with adapting the short story into a play script. And this is huge. For any of us writers, we know what it takes sometimes, just to be able to get a foot in the door. This opens all those doors. The play will be staged at the Market Theatre in September 2026, so it gives them sort of a year and a half to develop. And obviously, the closing date for this current competition is the 10th of April next week, which also happens to be the day of your book launch at the University of Johannesburg, which we need to note. So I'm just saying, in terms of the trajectory, that's already the doors that have already opened in terms of the top 10 and the top 3 and the top 1. There's every reason for young and emerging writers, and I don't think there's an age restriction here, but for emerging writers to throw that story into the hat and say, let's see what happens. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I must, give thanks to all of the partners involved, because I approached DALRO as an organization that in the past funded, theater awards, and they were receptive to the idea, and them partnering with the Center for Creative Arts just expanded the scope of the award. And for me, what is significant about it? Yes, it's important that emerging writers get the cash prize, but more than that, is for a story to have a life beyond that, beyond just having one award-winning story, but you have a life in the sense that it gets published, it gets performed, and yeah, well, once you hit the stage, it's the sky is the limit, as they say, because what that means is that you stand chances of earning what I call the passive income. Because the good thing about plays, I mean, I've written only two, but the most fulfilling experience about them is that one, you get instant feedback. In other words, as you sit in the audience, amongst the audience, you can hear the reaction immediately. But also, what it means is that the play can travel the world while you are sitting here. I've had my work going to Edinburgh, for instance, where I was not part of the a crew that traveled, but it's always satisfying to know that audiences around the world get to view your work, and that is what these emerging writers stand to benefit out of this competition.
Well, I think that, every one of you should feel very proud about putting this project together. I'm very excited to see the outcome, what comes of it in the next few days and weeks and months. And I think that this is the start of something really, really fantastic as the inaugural year of the Merit Award. So I think, well done on that.
Yeah, also, I think it's in line with what Themba stood for, because he believed in nurturing young minds. He did that in the newsroom. He did that as a teacher. Some people don't know that Themba used to teach the likes of Casey Mutsizi, the likes of the late Desmond Tutu. And, someone like Casey Mutsizi, for instance, he recruited him into the newsroom, and he worked with him. He was his deputy. And of course, he turned his House of Truth, his house, which he called the House of Truth, into a space for nurturing young minds, a space for intellectual engagement. So he believed in nurturing young minds, and that is what the competition is trying to do.
It's truly, truly wonderful. In terms of the competition, I will give a little more information for anyone interested. I know that they can go to the DALRO website directly, or they can go to the Facebook pages of the Center for Creative Arts or Time of the Writer to get more information, because we've literally got 4 days to deadline. Siphiwo, in terms of your work, where can we get the books? I know you're launching at UJ on Thursday afternoon. That's the 2 new collections, the 2 new publications. Generally, where can readers get hold of your works? And are there any other launches in other parts of the country?
Well, thank you. Well, my works are largely available in the leading bookstores around the country. However, the Missing Pages, which, as you know, is published in India, is not widely available at the moment. The only store that has it in Joburg is Bookcircle Capital. However, if you visit my website, www.siphiwomahala.co.za, siphiwomahala.co.za, then if you click there, you will be able to access some of my work, or you can always email me at info@siphiwomahala.co.za, info@siphiwomahala.co.za. Otherwise, I'm contactable on the socials, mainly Facebook, but also Instagram and X, formerly Twitter.
Fantastic. And I think there might be even opportunity to get hold of the biography of Ken Themba. I know that there'll be a lot of our academic and history enthusiasts of history and the social sciences who might want to get copies of that as well. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It was absolutely fantastic finally having you on the show with these new publications, and we wish you everything of the best as you set out to launch them over the next few weeks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward to the launch on Thursday, and well, there will be other activities going forward, but I'm excited about this interview. Thanks for having me on BookBytes.
Fantastic. And I know we'll see you at other literary events around the country as well. So we heard from Professor Siphiwo Mahala of UJ, and he's launching two new big books. The Missing Pages, a collection of short stories, as well as a collection of his plays he's written along the years. Please do get copies, especially if you're interested in the works of Ken Themba. And remember you have 4 days to send in those writings. If you have a novel work in project and you'll be able to take a short story out of that, or if you've written a short story and it's collecting dust in your bottom drawer, and you've always wondered if you can write, the DALRO Ken Themba Merit Award is a fantastic opportunity to get your work out there. It will be read by a range of judges. But there's also this ongoing kind of doors opening, so to speak, where winners will be able to work with various industry intellectuals and professionals to hone their craft, to be published, to have the work potentially presented as a play at the Market Theatre, and to attend various festivals around the country, as well as one international festival. These are fantastic opportunities. Please try your hand at this if you ever want to write, and check the DALRO Center for Creative Arts and Time of the Writer pages on Facebook for more information. That's it from us this weekend. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.